Good evening. It has just been reported that a BLM activist who was part of the Capitol building breach on January the 6th has now been arrested and charged. Meanwhile, a new undercover video has been revealed showing the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, talking about how the ban of President Trump was only the beginning of this type of censorship. And meanwhile, over in NASA, a senior scientist has been arrested and charged for lying as well as failing to disclose his ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Let's go through these stories together. This is your never-ending 2020 election update, and I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Now let's start today's discussion by talking about January the 6th. Now, we already discussed Mr. John Sullivan in an earlier episode. He is a BLM activist. He is the founder of a group called Insurgents USA, and most notably, he was part of the group that breached the U.S. Capitol building on January the 6th. Now, of course, he claims that he was just there to look around. He was acting in the capacity of a reporter. That's what he says. Basically, he was just there as a journalist, according to him. However, according to newly filed documents by the FBI, as well as videos that he himself posted on social media, they paint a very different story. For instance, in those videos that he posted himself on his own YouTube channel, he can be heard agitating the situation, encouraging violence, and egging people on. Take a listen. Now, when Mr. John Sullivan was questioned about why he was egging people on, why he was agitating the situation, he said that he did it to blend in with the crowd so that he wouldn't get beat up. Now, frankly, from my own personal experience of being there at the Capitol building on January the 6th, that seems like a bit of a flimsy excuse, because you could totally just be a quiet person walking around filming things, and nobody would say anything to you. In fact, that's exactly what I did. I just quietly walked around, I was recording things with my camera phone, and nobody did anything. They just left me alone. Now, regardless, as of yesterday, he has been officially charged with being on restricted grounds, with civil disorder, with violent entry, and disorderly conduct. It's unclear whether right now he has hired a lawyer, as his case is currently under seal in the federal filing system. Now, if Mr. Sullivan is going to be convicted, he will actually face jail time. If you'd like to read more about this BLM activist or to see his full uncut video from the Capitol break-in, those links will be in the description box below this video for you to check out. And by the way, that's the description box that's right below that like button that I hope you take a moment to smash. Everything that we talk about here, at least most of it, is somehow spun or just not reported by the legacy media outlets, and social media routinely censors information that's like this, including our channel. However, when you smash that like button, you are forcing the same YouTube algorithm that suppresses videos like this to share this video out to potentially thousands of more people, letting the truth be known far and wide. Let's talk about the social media giants. Yesterday, we already discussed how after banning President Trump from their platform, Twitter's stock price took a nosedive. It dropped by 12%, which translated to about $3.5 billion in their market value just being erased. Now, Facebook, who also banned President Trump, also took a giant hit. They lost about $47 billion in market value over that same time period. And all of that was wiped out in the course of just 2 trading sessions, by the way, so you never know what's going to happen in the future. Now, of course, if you've been following the story, it wasn't just President Trump who was banned. A large number of pro-Trump accounts were also deleted by both Twitter and by Facebook. And as for those users who tried to flee to other platforms, like for instance, people who try to go to Parler, Amazon, they cut Parler off from their web services, essentially just pulling that website down entirely. And now there is a lawsuit against them, against Amazon. However, let's focus on Twitter a bit further. As we discussed yesterday, Jack Dorsey came out and he publicly said that banning Trump set a dangerous precedent and further divided the nation. It also hurt their stock price quite a bit. So the question is this: do you think that they're going to change course and stop banning conservatives and stop banning Trump supporters from their platforms? Well, most likely not. In fact, Project Veritas just released an undercover video which shows internal discussions inside of Twitter wherein Jack Dorsey discusses the plan. Take a look.
We are focused on one account right now, but this is going to be much bigger than just one account, and it's going to go on for much longer than just this day, this week, the next few weeks. It's going to go on beyond the inauguration. We have to expect that. We have to be ready for that. So the focus is certainly on this account and how it ties to real-world violence, but also we need to think much longer term around how these dynamics play out over time.
Now, by the way, just as an aside about that video we just watched, I thought you'd find it interesting that when the founder of Project Veritas shared that video on Twitter, their system marked it as being sensitive content. Now, luckily, Project Veritas is very big and well known, but honestly, when I see stuff like that, when I see stuff being marked as sensitive content and suppressed, it just makes me wonder how many other whistleblowers might have been suppressed over the years and we just never heard about them. Now, let's go back to the actual content of that video. It basically confirmed what most people were already suspecting, that from the very beginning, it was not at least just about President Trump's account, and that this censorship will likely go on into the foreseeable future, at least on Twitter. Now, we here at the Epoch Times, we actually reached out to Twitter for comment, but have yet to hear back. And of note, something I want to mention is that the founder of Project Veritas, he said that further leaks from Twitter are coming from other whistleblowers. He said that, stay tuned. They may be private companies, but they have more power than all three branches of government. So we will indeed stay tuned and let you know as soon as anything comes out. Now, some lawmakers are actually moving towards a more proactive solution to this censorship problem. For instance, in North Dakota, a new bill was just introduced which would enable people to file lawsuits against Twitter and Facebook if their accounts were either deleted or censored. So this new proposed bill, I have it right here in my hands, it was actually sponsored by six lawmakers in that state, and it says that basically that websites with more than 1 million users would be liable in a civil action for damages to the person whose speech is restricted, censored, or suppressed, and to any person who reasonably otherwise would have received the writing, speech, or publication. So basically, this bill would make it so that social media companies would be held liable to not only the person who they censored, but also to their followers. Basically, the people who would have received their content if it wasn't censored. Now, the critics of this bill are saying that it won't have any effect because the law would immediately be deemed void as preempted by Section 230, because federal law is supreme over state law where they conflict, and this would create an express conflict. So basically, what these critics are saying is that since Twitter and Facebook are both technically platforms, at least under Section 230, they basically have a shield, even when they moderate user-generated content. So we'll be following this law as it's going to be working its way through the legislature in North Dakota, and we'll let you know if anything comes out. If you'd like to read more about this law, if you'd like to read more about the censorship on tech platforms, or if you'd like to watch that full Project Veritas video that came out of Twitter, those links will be in the description box below this video for you to check out. And now let's talk about NASA. Before we move on over to talk about NASA, I want to discuss a few topics we didn't get to talk about in the in-studio filming of today's episode, starting with this one here. 14 leaders of the MS-13 gang have been indicted by the Justice Department on charges related to terrorism. So all 14 of these leaders actually operated as the group's board of directors, and they directed the criminal activity basically around the globe over the last 2 decades for MS-13. And MS-13, in case you're not familiar with them, they're a gang that originated in El Salvador, and they are just straight brutal. Their motto, which will sum up their entire motif, is to kill, rape, and control. So pretty much tells you everything you need to know about them. Now, these indictments are actually the culmination of an effort by the Trump administration to dismantle these transnational criminal organizations like MS-13. In the year 2017, so about 3.5 years ago now, President Trump issued an executive order directing all federal agencies to coordinate in a whole of government approach to work together to dismantle these multinational criminal organizations. And this is now the result of it. This is the culmination. These indictments are, in my opinion, a good step in the right direction, and we'll see if any arrests come out of them. Now, moving over to the Pentagon, it was just announced that our troop levels in Afghanistan and Iraq have hit a 19-year low. Basically, across those two countries, we only have 2,500 troops left. Just to give you a bit of context, by the way, on January the 20th in Washington, D.C., we're going to have something along the lines of like 20,000 troops on the ground in Washington, D.C., which is 10 times the number of troops that we have combined in Iraq and Afghanistan. So in this announcement, Christopher Miller, who is the head of the Pentagon, he said that, quote, "The drawdown of U.S. force levels in Iraq is reflective of the increased capabilities of the Iraqi security forces," end quote. He's basically saying that the Iraqis are now at a point where they can better protect themselves, which is good. And he says that it brings the United States closer than ever to ending the nearly 2 decades long war. So this, of course, is also the culmination of the Trump administration's efforts. If you remember, even before President Trump took office, when he was on the campaign trail, I believe back in 2015, he was already talking about withdrawing our troops from the Middle East. And he's sort of made it a point of pushing that forward. And now our troops over there are at a 19-year low. Although, I mean, if you've been following this story, there was something that I read that I almost couldn't believe. There was an interview with, oh yeah, that's right, Jim Jeffrey. He was an ambassador. He was the U.S. envoy to Syria. And he basically said that the Trump administration's policies were thwarted by administration officials. So he gave an interview and he said that, quote, "We were always playing shell games to not make clear to our leadership how many troops we had there," end quote. So basically what he was saying, that White House officials were hiding the number of troops that the United States had in Syria from President Trump. I almost couldn't believe it when I read this. Yeah, so he said that basically there were a lot more than the roughly 200 troops that Trump initially agreed to leave in Syria last year. So we'll see how it develops with the change in administration. Now, moving over to the Census Department, the director of the Census Bureau just announced, and he ordered the workers there to stop complying with President Trump's order to collect data on the immigration status of people that are living in the United States. So basically, he issued a memo, and he said that officials in the agency should, quote, "Those involved should stand down and discontinue their data reviews." So to give you a bit of context on that, in 2019, President Trump issued an executive order directing all executive agencies to create a report concerning the immigration status of the people that they have records on within the United States and give them to the Department of Commerce. And that came right after the Supreme Court basically turned down his request to include a citizenship question on the U.S. Census itself. So he went the executive order route. And so the U.S. Census Bureau was working on it, and they were apparently actually coming pretty close to completing the report, but now it's getting canned. So according to this article here, there were only 3 analysts who were working on this report. And that might seem like a lot, perhaps to you, but that's actually compared to hundreds of analysts that were working on the census itself. And so the people working on this report were heavily understaffed. And so basically what I believe happened was that they just ran into a time crunch. They realized they couldn't finish the report before Trump's first term was over, and the director just told him to scrap it. Now, we reached out to the White House for comment, but have yet to hear back. But we will be following the census question very closely because it's important. It has to do with congressional seats. It has to do with the appointment and the allocation of federal funding throughout the United States. And so it's critical, and we'll be following any updates and reporting them to you. Now, lastly, I'd like to talk about an interview between John Solomon and Louis Dobbs on Fox News. I believe it was last night. In that interview, it was revealed that President Trump had authorized the declassification of all of the remaining documents that had to do with the FBI's probe into the Russia collusion thing, the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. So John Solomon, who's, by the way, the founder of justthenews.com, which in my opinion is a pretty good news website, he said that probably in the next 45 days, there'll be a huge stack, maybe like a 12 or 14-inch stack of documents that'll be declassified. And he said that they'll get to the very heart of the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation. So we'll have to see. I mean, frankly, nothing has been declassified thus far, and I've been following the Crossfire Hurricane investigation pretty closely, I want to say over the last 3.5 years now. And honestly, in terms of developments, I think that paint on a wall dries faster. It's so slow moving. But who knows? Maybe new developments will come out of it. Maybe we'll get some bombshell developments with these new declassified documents. Who knows? When they come out, I'll share with you what we find. So now let's talk about NASA.
2 days ago, a senior NASA scientist pleaded guilty to lying about his ties to China. The man's name is Meya Mayappan. He's worked at NASA for the past 27 years, and for the last 17 of those years, he was the chief scientist for exploration technology at NASA's Ames Research Center, which is over in Silicon Valley, I believe. Basically, he lied about not being part of China's 1,000 Talents program. Now, what's this program all about? Well, honestly, it doesn't get enough coverage in the legacy media, in my opinion, because it has so much meaning and so much implications for this country. Basically, the 1,000 Talents program is what the Chinese Communist Party uses to basically suck intellectual, scientific, medical, and business knowledge from around the world into China. It's basically a way for them to harvest the talents from the West and transfer the intellectual property back to the Chinese Communist Party. And this NASA scientist, he was part of it. Basically, according to the prosecutors, about 4 years ago, this NASA scientist applied for and was accepted into the 1,000 Talents Plan. He also worked as a visiting professor at a Chinese university. He gave lectures, he wrote research papers, and he received compensation for his travel back and forth. All of this, by the way, is not allowed, as NASA prohibits any outside employment activities without their approval to their employees. According to the FBI Assistant Director, members of U.S. government agencies are strictly prohibited from maintaining undisclosed affiliations with foreign entities, especially those that are actively seeking our intellectual property and technological advances. However, not only did this NASA scientist fail to disclose his dealings, he also straight up lied to the investigators. For instance, about 6 months ago, back in October of 2020, when he was questioned by federal investigators, this NASA scientist, he denied being a member of the 1,000 Talents program, and he denied being employed by the Chinese. He has now been charged with 1 count of making false statements and can face a maximum 5-year prison sentence, as well as up to a $250,000 fine if he's convicted. If you'd like to read more about this case, the links will be in the description box below this video for you to check out. However, let's use this Chinese espionage topic as a jumping off point for our next story. Now, you might remember that a few months ago, it was revealed that Eric Swalwell, who is a Democrat House member from California, he dated a woman named Fang Fang, or Christine Fang, and investigators found that she was very likely a Chinese spy. Now, of course, the legacy media outlets barely gave this story any airtime, so you might have actually not heard of it before, even though it was a pretty big deal. I mean, at that time, Eric Swalwell was sitting on the House Intelligence Committee, and he had access to classified information. And when this story broke late last year, Republicans asked the House to remove him from his post, writing in a letter to the House Speaker that, "We write to you today out of concern with Congressman Eric Swalwell's reported close contacts with a Chinese Communist Party spy," recently reported by Axios. Because of Swalwell's position on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, his close interactions with Chinese intelligence services, however unintentional they may be, are an unacceptable national security risk. So that was just a few months ago. However, it was just announced yesterday that despite Eric Swalwell's links to this Chinese spy, he will be returning to the House Homeland Security Committee. That's according to an announcement made by Nancy Pelosi yesterday. In that same announcement, by the way, she also said that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Democrat House member from New York, as well as a member of the Democratic Socialists of America, will now be on the House Financial Services Committee. Now, there were more appointments announced in the House yesterday. However, those were the 2 that I really wanted to highlight with you. Now, if you'd like to read the full list of appointments, that link will be in the description box below this video for you to check out. And now lastly, if you'd like to make sure that you have a source of uncensored, honest reporting, no matter what happens here on this platform, then I would highly recommend that you head on over to theepochtimes.com and get yourself a digital subscription. I'll throw a link in the description box below this video. We here at the Epoch Times, we have a team of independent journalists who spend all day, and sometimes frankly all night, looking at the facts, examining what's happening in this world, questioning the established narratives, and then reporting the truth to you as they find it. We try to be as open and transparent as possible with all of our reporting and provide you with the facts as well as the context so that you can make up your own mind about the happenings in this world. However, as you already know, on big tech platforms like this, as well as Twitter, Facebook, and all the rest, that's very hard to do. For instance, when I make videos like this, I literally have to think about what I can and cannot say. And I mean, really take a moment and imagine that for a second. I'm an American. I live in America. I'm presenting the facts that are properly sourced. Nothing that I'm saying is hyperbole or libelous, and yet I still have to go through mental gymnastics in order to not have these videos be banned or censored. It really feels to me at least like I'm working behind enemy lines, if I'm to be frank with you. And so again, if you value honest journalism, if you'd like to make sure that you always have a conduit to real reporting, or if you just want to support our mission, then head on over to theepochtimes.com and get a digital subscription. I'll throw a link in the description box below this video so you can just click on it and head on over. Now lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe to this channel if you want this type of videos delivered directly into your YouTube feed, and until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.